Thanks for staying with Citizen Weekend. In our headline stories, Kenya is now preparing for a grueling presidential election in 60 days after the Supreme Court annulled President Uhuru Kenyatta's re-election, citing massive irregularities and non-compliance with the Constitution. So Kenya is preparing for an election in 60 days, and we want to take a look at the scenarios, what we are likely to see in coming days. With me in studio is Mark Bichache, who is a communications strategist, and Vincent Kimosop, who is a policy and governance expert. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Albeit the fact that we've taken away your Saturday, we appreciate it. So let's just get right into it. And Raila has another chance to battle it out for the presidency, but we do know that he and his team, the NASA Brigade, have really come out strongly to criticize the IEBC, saying they must take, first of all, criminal responsibility for the act, and the fact that they will not allow the current team to organize and supervise this fresh election. Jubilee, on the other hand, says they are opposed to NASA's bid to kick out the IEBC. Let's begin with that.
You know, first, there's someone who I'd like to congratulate because he brought history to this country. That person is called Fazul Mohammed. Had Fazul not raided Africa, we would not be here. So I think he needs to be congratulated.
Congratulated for bringing.
I'm not sure, because he brought changes, though he didn't expect it. But that's on a light note. On the other side, is we have to consider what is the history of electoral commissions in this country. From 2007, we've replaced them, the entire commission, all the time. 3 times now we've done it. It has not worked. Perhaps the solution now is in beginning to build a bit of institutional memory into the IEBC, so that now we begin to fix it from the inside versus changing commissioners all the time and expecting that to be different. You know, this is what people call madness. You cannot do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. We've changed them every time since 2007 to no effect. Today, let's sit down and think and ask ourselves, in 60 days, instead of replacing the commission, can we replace the systems? Can we tighten what was wrong? Because we have lessons from 2007, 2013, and now. It sounds politically expedient to say you're kicking everyone out. But even NASA, if you were to think strategically, it is always better to face the opponent based on a system that you already know. You know what they used, you know their ins and outs. Take that as a learning and prepare yourself versus asking for these guys to be replaced. Because what you'll be doing as well, in 60 days, will you be campaigning for yourself to win or campaigning for IEBC to be kicked out?
Vincent,
that's the question.
Is reconstituting the current electoral commission an option at all? Like Mark said, we have 60 days.
You know, Lillian, I want to make a confession that I was one of the candidates who was interviewed to be possibly a commissioner at the IEBC. So I'm speaking to by merit, and I'm just saying this would be a discussion that I would not have the opportunity to have had. So my recommendation would be, I think we wait for the substantive ruling of the Supreme Court, because in the judgment, this is what Justice Maraga said, that the second respondent committed irregularities and illegalities. So when we have illegalities, my understanding is that people have to be held responsible. Now, if you look at
and Wafula Chebukati has said that indeed there will be some sort of punishment to those who...
Yeah. My recommendation, therefore, would be, if we are celebrating the decision from the Supreme Court, one of the things that therefore we have to go by is what the Supreme Court pointed out. They ordered the second respondent to organize an election. So if politically and strategically, it would be good to move in that direction, because in the event we go into a round of we need to change IEBC, we need to get a new team, we have time constraints of 60 days that an election has to be held. In the event IEBC meets this coming week, and they say maybe October the 10th next month is going to be the election. So maybe that is less than a month. So maybe strategically I would advise anyone, or even including NASA, that the best option is let those who are culpable be held accountable. Because at the moment, the president cannot even appoint a chairman of the IEBC. So I think it is good to be politically savvy and strategic in this period, and fix your eyes on the ball, which is winning the election.
Talking about fixing eyes on the ball, Jubilee is already hot on the campaign trail. We know they've held rallies in Narok, in Nairobi, and today in Nakuru as well. And IEBC has been told within 60 days, but they can decide to call this election at any time. NASA, on the other hand, seems to be in a celebratory mood, while Jubilee goes hard at it.
You know, anyone worth his salt knows that this ruling came by surprise. Whether you look at it statistically across the world, this is only the third country to have done that across the...
Yeah.
The other one, there was an appeal.
Yeah.
So the third, there's no appeal after that. Yeah. So statistically, it was an improbability. Based on 2013, was an improbability. So I think NASA is trying to catch up with its own victory. Because I think when they filed the petition, remember they filed it the last minute, I don't think anyone sat down and basically said, we win this, what do we do? And I think right now there's a lot of regrouping on the NASA side. But also on the Jubilee side, I think there is also a lot of reactionary talk, where there is a lot of talk of reaction, which might be tricky because then you galvanize who your core supporters are, who sympathize with your loss. But then what happens with the moderates that supported you? Because the moderates would be on the side of the rule of law. And one of the things that as Kenyans we need to understand is we need to separate our campaigning from our judiciary. It's very, very important that we do that.
Talking about separating campaigning from the judiciary, Kimosop, the decision to nullify the election by the Supreme Court, which seems to have reignited the executive's war with the judiciary. We've seen the Jubilee side clearly say that in as much as they have accepted this decision, they're not too happy about it. And let me just complete. So such attacks, whether they demean the persona of the president and bring dishonor to the judiciary, or if at all, really Jubilee is rightfully placed in feeling a little bit shortchanged in this kind of event.
Losing an election, however painful or justified, is not an easy thing. But if you really read the judgment, the summarized judgment, the justice says very clearly that the Uhuru Kenyatta did not commit any offense. They actually did not even talk about did he lose. They did not even speak to the numbers. So in my view, sober voices within Jubilee needs to arise and take a center stage so that they are able to actually use this opportunity to actually say, hey, by our victory, which was announced by IEBC, has not been questioned. What has been questioned is the electoral process. So if the electoral process had a problem, it means if you guys stand up again, we still are going to have our victory. So I think they need to look at the judgment very well. Already there are issues. The judgment pointed out that the problem was the referee. So if you have been recalled to do another rematch and no one has pointed fingers on the part of Jubilee, I think their response, in my view, at this point should be magnanimous, and they should be able to say, hey guys, we said if anyone has a grievance, go to court. 2013, the president was declared a winner. It was contested, and the judges of the Supreme Court says by unanimous decision that Uhuru Kenyatta won. So in my view, and he has said, I will honor and respect the decision of the court. So I think, allow me, since we are on a weekend, there is a word that is in the good book that says if you remove the wicked people around the king, his throne will be established. So I remember the days of Rehoboam. If he can get sober and upright and astute people around him, it will be very good moving forward.
And talking about 2013, let's talk about how many candidates will be allowed to participate in the new presidential ballot. The Electoral Commission is reportedly studying the 2013 Supreme Court ruling that advised that if at all there would be a fresh election, it would only be the petitioner and the disputed winner that would be allowed to contest once again. So are we looking at a scenario where we're likely to see all the other candidates contest again? What scenarios are we looking at?
Abdu Badida, if you look at all courts, dispute as in accepted the results, but also again went to the Supreme Court. So the others, Professor Wainaina, Kaluyu, there were 8 of them, if I can remember. I think they accepted the results. So you clearly see Raila and Uhuru will be on the ballot, and a possible 2 others. But the elections, clearly based on the results that came out, it will still be an issue of Raila and Uhuru Kenyatta. And since it is a rerun, the 50+1 will still be one of the requirements for a winner, and a win in 24 or more than half of the counties by 25%.
50+1, Mark Bichache, if this is not, if none of the candidates achieve this, what other scenarios are we looking at going forward? Well,
that will have to be a presidential runoff between the first 2 candidates. So it would probably mean another 30 days of campaigning after the election. However, it's very important to note that, number one, I think this particular ruling will only serve to galvanize support for the top 2, because I think the only 2 candidates that enjoined themselves were Ikuru Okot and Wainaina. Now, legally, since that was a Supreme Court ruling, someone could go to court and challenge that and say, what is the constitutional interpretation of another presidential election? And that could bring in questions of, do we go into nominations again? But in 60 days, there might be a time limit under constitutional framework by which to limit who can participate in this election. That being said, that tells you that it's most likely, if you have 2 candidates, that one of them will hit 50+1. Okay, because it's just 1 vote. So it's statistically very hard to get a dead hit of exactly 50% of the votes given the 2 candidates. Statistically, it's very unlikely. So we are looking at a first round win. And based on how people are reacting, you will find that possibly the people who voted for Uhuru will keep voting for Uhuru, and the people who voted for Raila will keep voting for Raila. The question really is the IEBC able to keep the processes as the court had?
They have no option. They have no option, because if you, by the way, Lillian, the judgment that came from the courts will have ramifications not only on the elections alone, but also in other institutions, because the justice says very clearly, we need fidelity to the constitution, adherence to the rule of law. And the rule of law applies not only during elections period, it also applies in other things that affect the governance of our institutions. So in my view, the electoral body has no option but to adhere to the law and ensure that they conduct an election that is complies with the constitution, I think Article 81 and 86, and also the laws that apply. So there is no option. And in fact, if people will not apply the law based on this ruling, they will be held liable individually. So I think what the Supreme Court has done is that they have really raised the bar for everybody, for itself and also for other institutions in the country. And I was reading somewhere that we have borrowed a lot from the American Constitution. Ours is only 7 years, but we have something now to tell the world. So I think, Lillian, once people tone down and they realize that this ruling really was not about Uhuru nor Raila, it was about our country, it was about the return to righteousness and justice, and a discussion, because during the election it was either you're on this side or on the other side. But this judgment has given us an opportunity to do an introspection, a self-discovery journey, going back to the crossroads and looking back and saying what is really right and what is just for our society.
Do you agree with Vincent, Mark? Because there's also an element of fatigue from the electorate who now feel that they must go through this process all over again. The campaign period is extremely aggressive on the electorate as well. Therefore, a sense of exhaustion and therefore likely voter apathy.
Well, I think the issue and part of the national conversation we need to have is why are our elections such high stakes? The reason why there is exhaustion is because every time we go near to an election, business stops and everything becomes about the election, and all we talk about at home, in the bars, in the churches, is just the election, 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 election. And the beauty about this, it is beginning to cause our nation to ask questions like, if the election comes near towards regards the exams, what will we do? Will we shut down our schools so that we can elect people? Will we postpone exams so that we can elect people? And those are the questions that we need to have as a nation. The second thing that is very critical is this, that number one, it might have the opposite thing. We're expecting that there will be low voter turnout because of the apathy. But the reality of the matter is this may serve to galvanize the supporters of Jubilee and NASA to say, you know what, we have another chance to make our voice known. And my encouragement to the Kenyan people is this: turn up in high numbers, because the beauty about turning up in high numbers, you reduce the chances of any fishy business, because there's a very small percentage at the top from which you can scheme. So the reality of the matter is, I believe as a Kenyan, and as a Kenyan who's worthy of that title Kenyan, go out and vote. And I'll tell you why you need to go out and vote. It is better we get it right in the next 60 days than to spend 5 years complaining about what you didn't do in these 60 days. So that 60-day sacrifice, totally worth it. But
remember, the reason why our elections is high stake is because there are other underlying things that we do not address, that only elections gives us an opportunity to address them. So what we have actually gotten is that if you conduct an elections and everybody and the process is credible, what is going to happen increasingly, that emotions and the emotive connotations to an election is going to subside. I can tell you, because what is going to happen, look at the case of Joyce Laboso, for example, in Bomet, together with Isaac Ruto. You could see very clearly after their declaration, they came together and they said, we need to forge ahead. Now, that is the kind of scenarios we want to have at the national level, where we can compete and thereafter shake our hands and say, all the best, go ahead. But we also need to ask ourselves other questions. Is it that we still have a lot of the powers that an institution like the presidency wields, so that everybody knows that if I get all I need to get is get the presidency, our problems are sorted. It is an opportunity to serve people. So in my view, we need to ask ourselves, what is it that such offices have that makes us galvanize so much around it? Right. And then finally, I think it is important that during this process, we don't miss out other conversations. I can tell you, we started campaigning in around March somewhere there. Remember, that was the nomination? So greater part of 2017 will be reserved to the elections. The impact of it will be on businesses and everything. The advantage is that it is good to bear the cost currently, so that moving forward 10, 20 years down the line, like now, we will no longer need to be telling somebody who loses an election, hey, go to court, because you've seen it is possible a presidential decision to be annulled. So there are also gains that for us to see the greater picture, we need to tell the entire story in different spheres and in different sectors, so that everybody can see what is the implication of this. Look, for example, the role of observers has been questioned, courtesy of this election.
And that's true. But as we begin to wind up, Mark, the messages that are coming in now is that NASA must now clearly, or it is in their best interest to deliver a clear victory for Raila Odinga, or perhaps this could be their election to lose all over again, and more so humiliatingly.
You know, the thing is about this particular ruling, it has given NASA a head start, okay? A head start because, number one, there is sympathy. There is that historical sympathy of, is this another injustice that has been wrought about them? But what
could that sympathy add to their favor, perhaps, because of the sympathy votes that will come from that?
Absolutely. Sympathy is one of the biggest players in any political game. And it's why, by the way, George Bush actually won his second term, because of the war in Iraq. There was like, you know what, let's give him a chance to finish what he started. Now, on that basis alone, NASA has an advantage. But here's the thing. To have an election without contestation in this country, 2002 taught us that you need to have a wide margin between number one and number 2. That's what needs to happen. And the reality of the matter is this, that either whether you're a Jubilee supporter or a NASA supporter, what is incumbent upon you is you have to show up and vote, because only that majority will be able to, number 1, give Jubilee that credibility if they win the election, or to vindicate Raila Odinga should he win.
So should Jubilee win this election, then you see NASA accepting defeat and going home.
Exactly, because what needs to happen, once the IEBC runs something that is credible, we know all the Form 34s are signed, they're serialized, they have their watermarks, we have the process that is clear, then whoever who wins comes out very cleanly, and that will be a good thing for this nation. And that's what we need to aim for.
But remember also, Jubilee also have an opportunity to play the sympathy card, because the ruling from the Supreme Court says that we did not find the third respondent, that is Uhuru Kenyatta, to have committed any offense. So also Uhuru Kenyatta can go out and say, hey people, I won an election. Somebody slept on the job. And you know, all you need to do is please let show our people that we won this election. So my recommendation to both sides is that no one should rest or sit pretty saying that sympathy is going to win you an election. I have run for a political seat in campus, and I can tell you it is about the numbers. Anyone who is going to work out the numbers very well and run an effective, cohesive, coordinated campaign that is supported by a strong strategy and a concrete message is going to carry the day.
And we're beginning to wind up now. So as we get to your winding comments, somebody is saying, it's news when man bites a dog, but when dog bites a man, that is not news. What's wrong with our leaders today? What kind of these words are they telling us? What's wrong with this great nation? Somebody here saying Mungu Saidia. And I think this is in reference to what Mark said about the campaigns being riddled with a lot of talk surrounding the judiciary and how it has failed this time around. That's from the Jubilee side. On the NASA side of things, we've had them give press briefings where they're clearly saying that the IEBC cannot hold this election afresh. So when we look at both sides of the political divide and what they're telling the electorate, really, as a strategist, Mark, do you see this as the right way forward in as far as getting those votes, because they're going head-to-head now in this presidential contest? But what they're saying during the campaign period is really criticizing the institutions that have been mandated to run this process. You know,
it's a sad thing, because in this country, even justice is translated according to tribe. The country is divided because depending on your tribe, the ruling was good or bad. There is no reasoning beyond that and asking yourselves what happened at this verdict. It's the same issue with the IEBC. The IEBC is not an institution. If you remove, it's not an institution, a one-man institution. If you remove Chebukati, there are thousands of employees still in there that you still need to deal with. So the reality of the matter, Kenya needs to come to the point where we're building institutions and not politicizing institutions. That's the problem. You cannot play politics with your judiciary. It does not make sense, even for parliamentarians to say. So what
would be a better strategy then, as opposed to criticizing these institutions?
What you need to do is galvanize your vote. Go out there and get your people to support you. Make it about your people and not about the institutions. The IEBC is not going to vote, and neither is the judiciary as an institution going to vote. Every Kenyan is going to vote. So make your campaign about the Kenyan people. Make the campaign about the poverty the Kenyan people are facing. Make the campaign about the health of the Kenyan people. Make the campaign about you being the leader who will solve the issues of the Kenyan people and not attack the institution, be it the IEBC or the judiciary, because we need to build these institutions. And how do you build them? By placing trust and giving them opportunity to grow and have institutional memory.
So these attacks, Vincent, as we close, whether, you know, how they are demeaning the persona of these institutions really, when, and, you know, NASA is about to also get on the campaign trail as well, and we are expecting to hear such talk as well there, at least as regards the IEBC. How better should they structure their campaigns as they go at it this time round? And
that's what, I repeat what I said, one of the advantages we have is that we have an opportunity whereby we can have a conversation that is not about NASA and Jubilee, courtesy of this judgment. Now, for me, I will remember the words of Barack Obama when he visited Africa for the first time and said Africa needs strong institutions and not strong men. one of the things that will take us from where we are currently is if we live by the spirit and the letter of Chapter 6 of our Constitution on leadership and integrity, that challenges and calls upon leaders to conduct themselves in public and in private in a manner that brings honor and dignity to the offices that they occupy, where appointments, be it elective or appointive, is done by merit. When I can go for an interview between me and Mark, and I know clearly that the best person was chosen, not based on technical know-how, but technical know-how, we will shake our hands and say, Mark, I wish you the best, do a good job, make us proud. So we really need to go back to the foundations. The introductory words from, I repeat again, Justice Marage says the greatness of a nation is in its fidelity to its constitution, adherence to the rule of law, and above all, the fear of God. If we can go back to such a place, I think then we will have a country to be proud of, and to really say that we will have prosperity and hope and prestige abroad.
Final remarks. We're closing now. Very briefly, NASA is regrouping. NASA is expected to go into a retreat, possibly to regroup. We know that Jubilee is already hard at it. What do you think? I mean, do you have any idea whatsoever, or could you give us a hint of what you think the line of thinking could possibly be now that they have to look at a new strategy ahead of course, this poll that is expected to be any time between now and 60 days?
One of the strategies that I think both parties will be looking at is how many of the other elective positions would go into a petition mode based on the Supreme Court ruling. And that creates a very interesting playing field, because then do you suspect that the people who lost to Jubilee in those particular areas will begin to pander towards NASA? And the same for the Jubilee side. That's one. How are you going to use? Because you see, what happened in the past is you had MPs, governors campaigning for themselves, but they were campaigning for you as well. Now the question is, when you're only running for the top seat, how do you influence either the sitting or the losing candidates to begin to campaign for you? The second thing is mobilization of resources. You spent a lot of money and a lot of time on these resources. Are you going to do that again? Number three, you ran on a particular agenda. Are you going to keep your agenda, or are you going to change it? Are you going to be able to say that now that this is what has happened in our country, this is what I'm now promising? Are you going to maintain the manifesto as is? Also, very interestingly, what happens should Raila say, you know what, I'm stepping down, I want Kalonzo to take it, I want Mudavadi to take it? What happens to that in law? So what they're looking at most likely is they're looking at the numbers and saying that what we know is we lost in areas A, B, C, D. What can we do to improve? What changes need to happen? And given that you cannot offer government, county government positions anymore because those are the governors already in play, what kind of deals are you going to do in talking about cabinet appointments, ambassadorships and things like that, to be able to galvanize an army behind you? Because those who are not running for electoral office do not have the impetus to campaign because I was campaigning for myself before. Those are the questions. And then of course on the part of NASA, how do they keep this winning mood until election day? Okay, in the part of Jubilee, how do they get to the point where they're playing to their gallery and saying, listen, we need you to come and support us en masse. We need you to come and push this agenda forward because we won and want to stay as winners. Those are the two things that are probably happening.
If you want to win an election, you need three things: a coherent strategy, a compelling message, resources, people and money. So what I can see both parties are doing strategically, our elections is ethnic. So everybody will galvanize their ethnic bases to the last man. Then the next frontier is to reach out to areas that for a top-up. So you would expect, for example, Jubilee to consolidate their gains in Western Kenya and their gains in Nyanza or Kisii specifically, and also at the coast, and to have a regional strategy for the upper part of our country. That is Marsabit. That is how I see Jubilee doing. On NASA, on the other side, they will still consolidate their bases, but they will likely to come up with a reforms message that will see them get civil society on board, get, as in people, a pro-reform kind of message, mirroring the 2002 scenario. That's how I see it playing. And ultimately, this election will still be won on turnout. The person who will get everybody to rally and to wake up on the day the IEBC will declare will carry the day. And I think NASA needs to be aware that they are dealing with an incumbent. There are benefits that come with being an incumbent. Access to intelligence, the infrastructure that you have. So one thing NASA has to do if they want to win, they have to really have put a stronger system in place, because that is how I see the game playing. Because 2002 show, if you want to beat an incumbent, you have to win by a big margin. If Jubilee consolidates and they sell their message that, hey, give us an opportunity to finish our agenda, they have to refine that in a way that resonates with everybody, so that they see that this thing of Tuko Pamoja needs to be unpacked. Of what does Tuko Pamoja means to somebody in Northeastern, to somebody at the coast, and also to somebody in Western Kenya, because there are two bases, Rift Valley and Central Alinta. So
it's going to be a game of numbers. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I've been talking to Mark Bichache, who's a communication strategist, and Vincent Kimosop, policy and governance expert. Very interesting discussion that we'll be having, I believe, in coming days as we wait for the IEBC to call the date when when Kenyans will go to the polls once again after they declared a fresh election must be held within 60 days. We're back with the spot. Stay tuned.